Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's training. Thank you all for taking the time and joining us today. It's so lovely to see everybody. My name is Leah, and I'm the administrative assistant here at Africa Fire Mission. And before we get started with our training, it's going to be a great training today. It's actually part 2 of last week if you were here last week. So it's going to be a continuation of that. But before we get started, I do just want to remind everybody of a couple of things. Number one is certificates. So we do give out certificates of attendance for these videos. But you do have to attend 70%, which is usually about 45 minutes of an hour-long training. And if you attend that 45 minutes, then you get a certificate, and the certificate will have the name that you see on your Zoom. And we're getting a lot better at it, but it still happens occasionally where the name will be something kind of funky, like your phone battery name or whatever that is. And so if you can change that for me right now, it does make it a little bit easier so I don't have to go through and remake those certificates for you. I will do it if it happens. It's no big deal, but it just really speeds it up if you change your name. And I also ask everybody to stay muted throughout the whole presentation. Unless you have a question, then please raise your hand or type it in the chat and we will call on you. And we'll also have a little short time to talk about the session as well if we want to, a little bit in tea time before you guys start chatting about other things. But with all that being said, I do just want to have one last reminder that this is recorded and then posted on our YouTube channel. It's a very, very busy time for us right now here at Africa Fire Mission. So it might not go up this week, but it'll definitely be up in the next week or two. And so if you ever want to go back and refresh on something that we trained about and you think, oh, what did that person say? That was so awesome. You can go back and we have all of our trainings on YouTube. And so with all that being said, I hand it off to our fire safety advocate, Jose, and he has a little word of encouragement for you guys.
Thank you, Leah. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, Frank, for being here and actually gracing the day. Today is quite a busy day in the organization that I'm hosted here in Mathare in Kenya, and I welcome you all. I welcome you all in today's session. So last week we had the Fire Safety Week. And surprisingly, it was in the whole world that they were doing the Fire Safety Week. And it was quite an interesting time because most of the counties were actually participating in it here in Kenya. But then it is important to note that it doesn't stop at the Fire Safety Week. It continues. In fact, for me, what I say is, once you are in the Fire Safety Week, it's actually a continuation. It's the first week of the rest of the year. And so it comes to a point whereby you might feel that the efforts that you're giving towards the giving the information out about fire might be going to not very good years, or you might think that people are ignoring you. Yeah. So my encouragement to you is, it comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 7. It says, but as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. You see, in the fire safety and in fire prevention, you find yourself really giving out too much, and you tend to think, is it really worthy? Is it really making an impact? What I will encourage you is, do not stop. Do not stop. Every day when you go out there, whatever you're teaching, just know that you are impacting a life. When you're giving that fire brigade number, you are changing a life. When you're showing stop, drop, and roll, you are encouraging somebody. And also, please know that you are the true representation of the first responders, or also the firefighter. So do not give up. And also know that, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. That is actually in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. It is only God who's going to actually repay you, not your boss, not your county, not your country. So it is only God who's going to encourage you. So don't stop, even as the Fire Safety Week has ended. Please continue throughout the year, because whatever you're doing is saving a lot of lives. Thank you very much for listening in. The encouragement time. Back to you, Leah.
Thank you so much for that, Jose. As I say every week, but it really is just such an honor to listen to you share an encouraging word every week. And it really does do a lot. So we thank you very much and appreciate you so much for all the thought and effort that you put into those word of encouragements. But I am going to pass it off to Frank now. And he has a great presentation for us. So thank you so much once again for joining us today. And let's get into the session.
Great. Thank you, Leah. I really appreciate that. And Jose, thank you for those words of encouragement. Those are very heartfelt. Let me see if I can share the screen again. Nope, I'm not there. Where am I at now? Oh, you are screen. It says I'm screen sharing. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see your screen, but I can't see your slides. Can't see your slides.
Okay, why can't you see my slides?
They're right down there at the taskbar.
Okay, so my screens are up, or my slides are up now?
Right
yes,
there.
I can see them.
Yep.
Oh, very good.
You can see them.
Great, very good. Well, I think it's good afternoon in Kenya. Is that correct, Jose? Good afternoon. It's morning here in North Carolina.
Yes, you are.
Very good. It's morning here in North Carolina. As Leah said, my name is Frank Montes de Oca. I'm a retired fire chief from the Orlando area. So if you're familiar with the Florida, state of Florida in the United States, that's where I first started my career, and moved to Ohio and to North Carolina, other states, and finally retired. So what I'd like to talk about today is scene management. And before I get going too far, let me see if I can advance this slide. Why is this slide not advancing? Okay, is there a reason why we're not advancing here? There we go. So first of all, thanks to Chief Howard Cohen. I think last week, Chief Cohen was on. He sat in for me. I had some family issues that I had to take care of. And so thanks again to Chief Howard. We communicated by email the other day. There are a couple of issues that came, some questions, I guess, more than issues that came up about when someone assumes command or tries to assume command, and then there's some other folks that are kind of disagreeing or trying to take over command. So we'll try to cover that towards the end, in a section I call clarification. And then there was also an issue with a discussion about hot wash, the term hot wash. And so we'll cover that in the later part of the presentation. So here we go. Today, what we're going to cover are, I like to start off with a little bit of definitions so that we're all on the same page. Many of you are probably in your further into your career. You've been there several years. You're an incident commander, or you've commanded several incidents, whether they're fires or rescues or what have you. But there's always, in my experience, there's always been questions between strategies and tactics. Really, what we kind of use the term interchangeably, but there really are some definitions of the two. And so I want to get that kind of definition section out of the way. So we'll talk about that. And then you'll notice on the screen, the rule of three, it's in red. And the reason I put that in red is because if there's anything that you take away from today's presentation or discussion, I would like you to kind of put it in your what I call my brain box, the rule of three. I learned it many, many years ago at the National Fire Academy that I went to a couple times. And what stuck out of my mind, and I've used many, many, many times when I was out commanding fires or rescues or what have you, was the rule of three. So we'll cover that. Then we'll cover what I call scene management truisms. These are tips or tricks or things that we've all learned in our careers that we know that the next time we experience that same type of scene, the truism will pop up again. It's in our brain box, in our hard drive, in our head. So we'll talk a little bit about these truisms. Then we'll go on to clarifications, which are the two issues that popped up in last week's discussion. And then lastly, we'll do some Q&A throughout. Jose, if you're on for a second, when we go into do you prefer to have the questions pop up as we present, or do we save them to the end? And I'm good with either way.
Save it to the end.
Okay.
We combine that with during tea time.
Okay, very good. All right. So we'll try to keep the questions down. And I think Leah is on. And so if we have any chat questions that are just really burning on someone's mind and they're ready to go out the door, we can try to interrupt if we have to. So we'll play it fast and easy for a while. All right. So here we go. Let's jump into this. This is something I've learned and remembered throughout my whole life. I've kind of boiled down my career of 38, maybe 40 years in the service. And I find that firefighting is a simple undertaking. It really is. If you think about we can talk about the quadrivalent disassociation between the flame and the fuel, and we can talk about the fuel interspace and all that, all those terms that scientists like to get involved in. But for what I call down and dirty firefighters like me, simple firefighters, it's a pretty straightforward undertaking. But we also understand that it's often complicated by factors we can't easily control. And so that's where the incident command presence really takes effect on our troops out there. So just a little thought for the moment, and we'll pop into our first one. So strategies. A lot of people think strategies and tactics are one and the same, and they really aren't. Strategies, when you arrive at a scene, whether it's a house fire or a structure fire in a business, or whether it's a rescue, whether it's a flood, whatever it might be, the strategy is what we want to do, the overall picture, the big objective. And so when we arrive at a structure fire, is that objective suppression, or is it exposure protection? In other words, we've decided that the structure that's on fire, the primary structure, is so well involved, maybe 60, 80, 90% of it is involved. It's already vented through the roof, that we decided not to apply water to that structure, but perhaps we want to think about applying water to the structures surrounding it, the home next to it or the building next to it. And so that suppression directly on the fire might be changed as the incident commander starts to put his game plan together of exposure protection. Or maybe we talk about, rather than applying water to the fire because we have limited manpower, we have limited capabilities and resources, we decide to we decide to rescue the occupants of the fire. So the strategy is what we want to do, and as the incident commander arrives and decides what he or she wants to apply his or her forces to do, that's what they develop, that what if, the strategies. And so then we go to the tactics. That's the how. How do I want to apply my objectives to this particular incident? Is it direct application, go directly to the fire, or go directly to the automobile that's overturned and leaking fuel? Or do I want to exclude the fire by closing off some of the doors and some of the entryways and compartmentize that fire? Do I want to stabilize that vehicle before I actually get to the patients? Do I want to remove and treat them rather than stabilize the victim of the fire, depending upon the situation? So, as we talked about earlier, the strategy is what I want to do, and the tactics are how I want to do this. I don't want to get so simplistic that I offend those of us that have been in this business a long time, but I'm thinking perhaps we will have some people on today that are just getting into the incident command mode of their career. And so we want to kind of clarify that if we could. So let's go on to the rule of three. As I mentioned earlier, the rule of three is the thing that is one of the things that has stuck with me throughout my whole career. I learned it earlier on in my career at the National Fire Academy. And it's one of those things that kind of jumped out at me, and I read it several times over and over and over again. And I've applied it to literally every event that I went to. So the first rule of three is, what do I have? Now that may sound very simplistic, but what I'm trying to evoke here is the fact that oftentimes we get on the scene and there's so much chaos going on, there's so many people yelling, there's so much activity going on, that we lose sight of the fact of taking just a microsecond to determine what is it really that I have that's going on here. Do I have a life safety issue? Do I have simply an extinguishment issue? Do I have a fuel tanker that's leaking fuel and maybe it's running down the sidewalk and it's going into maybe a residential area? So what is it that I really have that's going on that I need to deal with? And the second question, again, very simple question, is where's it likely to go? You know, we often say that when we arrive on the scene, we're the ones who take care of the incident where that individual or individuals, they are going through the worst part of their life, the worst time of their life. And so we have to make it right. We have to make second decisions to do that. So the second question we want to ask is, where is it likely to go? If I don't intervene at all, is it going to get worse? Is it going to remain the same? Will it get better perhaps? So that's the second question we want to ask. And lastly, we want to ask, what is needed to solve the problem? So if we assume that we have determined what we really have, the big picture, and then we focus it down to really the essence of what we have going on, where is it likely to go without my interaction or with my interaction? And then lastly, what do I need? Do I need more manpower? Do I need more vehicles with water on them? Do I need some specialized rescue tools? Do I need some technicians that are more specialized and more knowledgeable of the situation I have than I am? And so those are the three questions. And again, this may seem very simplistic, but you can literally boil all of your situations that you'll arrive on with these three questions. Okay, so we had someone with a raised hand. Is there a question there? Okay, we will move on.
Just
Okay.
go ahead. I think they raised up by mistake.
Oh, okay, very good. So let me take a drink here. Okay. So as I mentioned in the opening, these are scene management truisms. These are tips and tricks and approaches to situations that I learned and some of my colleagues learned over the years, and I've put them to paper. Matter of fact, this is part of a book that I'm writing. It's going to be 366 tips and tricks from Chief Taco. Chief Taco is the nickname that I got earlier on in my career because my boss couldn't pronounce my last name, and he said, "Well, I'm just going to call you Taco from now on." So that stuck throughout my whole 40 years in the business. So let's look at the first truism. We talked about strategies and we talked about tactics and the what and the how. And oftentimes I've seen in my career, I was a training chief for many years in a department, and I'd go out on scenes and watch guys work and take care of problems. And often I found that they would try the same tactic over and over and over again on the same situation. And oftentimes that tactic did not work. And so the first truism that I learned is when a tactic is not working, change it or consider changing it, because it's likely not to get any better if you keep pounding the same tactic to the same problem over and over again. The example I would give you is as we started to respond to auto accidents and we were trying to open the door or pop the door, we would use power tools. I know in some parts in Kenya, there are departments that have power tools and others that use hand power tools. And we found that regardless of which tool you're using, oftentimes we would make the approach, we'd take the bite into the crease between the body of the car and the door, and it would just start tearing the sheet metal, just tear it and continue tearing it. And it wouldn't work, but the folks are so determined to get that door open, the same tactic they're using, that they would waste many precious moments rather than either going the other side and entering the vehicle to apply whatever first aid that was needed to the patient or the victims, or rearranging or reapproaching the situation they have to try to open that door. So if you have a tactic that's not working, try another one, change it, stop it, because it's likely not to get better if you continue pounding at it. The other problem is you'll continue to waste more precious time and energy of your folks and more resources that you may have limited in your department. So try to change your tactic when you see that's not working. So I call this the plan A, B, and X. So when you arrive on the scene, everyone has a plan in their head, or maybe a procedure that is written down that from their department of what you want to do in a given situation. My experience has been that the fire or the situation hasn't read your manual. The fire is going to do what it's going to do. The situation that you have at hand right there doesn't know whether you're good or bad or experienced or not experienced. And so you're going to apply your first plan. Oftentimes, kind of like the first slide I showed you as far as changing your tactics, make sure you have a plan B in your back pocket, because things are going to go bad. We all know that. Those of you that are experienced incident commanders, you know that your plan is going to go bad. Have a plan B, and always have a plan X, which will be the next slide here, I think. Let's see. Yeah, that is, always have an exit strategy. When you're in doing some interior firefighting and your plan A is working for a while, but then it starts to either you've run out of water, you got low water pressure, or the fire has found a new seat of fuel to catch hold of, it's not going to know what your plan is, and you're going to have to go to your plan B, whatever that is, maybe to bring more hose lines in, to bring more manpower in, to bring more engines into or pumpers into your scene. But even if that doesn't work as well, then you might have to go to your plan X and your exit strategy. So before you get into battle, before you start that battle rhythm of fighting that fire, of taking advantage of your resources to affect that disaster, have your plan A, your plan B, and your exit strategy where everyone backs out, whether you have a call a mayday or everyone back out of the building or the structure, and make sure you have that before you go into battle. Okay. Some of you may have experienced this in a house fire, in a residential fire, where the occupants come running out and say, everyone's out, we're okay, and just fight the fire. Well, we also know that you as professionals, as firefighters, you know that's not always the case. People get excited, there's a lot of chaos, and oftentimes you think that people have gotten out, or the family thinks that the children have gotten out of the structure or out of the house, and they're not. So I always have a truism that says, don't trust the escaping occupants who tell you everyone is out. So if you're going to make your primary search and then your secondary search, you might have to make even a third search for that to make sure that the occupants are out. The example I would give you is I was a battalion chief in a fairly large county, is about 1,000 square miles, and I responded to a tour bus from Brazil. The tour bus got into an accident. It hit a car, and many of the occupants on the tour bus were injured. As I arrived, most of them were out of the vehicle, but we still sent firefighters and EMTs into the bus to see if there were other people that were inside still that were injured. And we started working with the occupants that were outside. Now, the problem we had was I didn't speak Portuguese. None of us spoke Portuguese, and most of the people, including the driver, did not speak very fluent English. And so we had this communication problem. And what we found later on, fortunately, not too long into the incident, but we found that some of the occupants who had gotten off the bus had started walking into the woods or started walking into the brush, trying to find aid or help or what have you. So we had to bring in more resources to fan out. We brought in a helicopter to look and see if there's any more people that had escaped from the bus that were in need of care. So as we approached the bus driver and some of the occupants that said, is everyone out? And they kind of said they were. Yes, they were all out, but they had escaped or they had moved away from the scene. So as professionals, we want to make sure that we trust our instincts sometimes more than the occupants' statements or instincts. So we want to make sure that we don't come back a day later or 2 days later and we find a victim that has been overlooked and has died. And again, that applies to vehicle accidents, mostly to structure fires, but oftentimes to vehicle accidents or transportation accidents as well. We learned this early on in my career as we started to develop what we considered were better and better approaches to residential fires, to structure fires. And if you have time to deploy a primary line, whether it's an attack line or whether it's a supply line, oftentimes you have the time to deploy a backup line or secondary line, because we also realize that sometimes that primary line fails on us. The pumper that is pumping, or the engine that is pumping that water to us, fails for whatever reason. They run out of fuel, they run out of water. There's a kink in the hose outside the structure fails, or whatever the situation might be. And oftentimes we are in need of a secondary line. So whether you are providing water from a hydrant or from a tanker or from a tender to the attack engine, that primary line often needs a secondary line just for the exposure protection for your firefighters. So some words of thought there. Now we're going to get a little further into the presentation. We talk about incident command. And someone might that are just coming on wondering, well, why are we not seeing pictures or shots of scenes? And I think this one, to me, this presentation is more for those of you that are listening today, to kind of use your imagination. You know what your structures look like. You know what your house fires scenes look like. You know what your vehicle accidents look like. Rather than me trying to impose what accidents and scenes I've gone to, I'd like you to kind of use your imagination as to what those scenes look like in your mind, in your experience. And so we're getting towards the incident command aspect of this presentation. And one thing I would like to impose on you is that freelancing kills firefighters. And if you're not familiar with the term of freelancing, it simply means if you've not assigned a task or a tactic to a firefighter or a firefighting crew, and they then start kind of wandering around the scene doing what they want to do, then you've lost control of that scene. And when you lose control of that scene, things happen. You lose control of the fire itself, perhaps. You may lose firefighters who are involved in some tasks that you don't want them to do. You may have opposing hand lines that cause injuries. You have a firefighter that gets lost and you're not sure where they are. And so the term freelancing is just having firefighters that are not assigned a task. Now you may ask, okay, so if I don't have enough tasks for my firefighters, which I don't think is the case too often, but if you do, then you might want to just simply stage them. And you can use that by having someone, an aide or someone else who's assisting you, to get those firefighters kind of set up off to the side so that you can call them into action when you need them. But the bottom line is, and the most serious part of this, is that freelancing kills firefighters. We go on to the aide. Now, you may not have the resources to have an aide, but perhaps you have someone who wants to volunteer their time. Maybe they're a little older and they don't want to do the firefighting, or they're not capable of doing firefighting. Maybe they have a challenge. Maybe they can't lift the weights that you need them to lift, or whatever the situation might be. That person can still be placed into service by calling them an aide or using them as an aide. In the business I was in, or the departments I was in, we used to call them incident command technicians, or ICTs. I've heard them called emergency scene technicians, or ESTs. Someone who can help you keep track of how many firefighters you have on the scene, maybe how many EMTs are assisting the patients, taking a list of where the various resources are being applied, and so you can kind of keep track of it. Because we found in our studies and our research that in some large events, disasters perhaps, or just very large events, you can have upwards of 5,000 or 10,000 small pieces of information and thought processes going on that the incident commander has to take care of over the span of that situation. So oftentimes you need people to kind of take off some of that burden to help you keep your mind focused on what you have going on. So a good aide is worth their weight in gold. If you can find someone who maybe can't fight fire or doesn't want to fight fire, but wants to help, and they're on the scene with you, and you've trained them properly and tell them what you want them to do for you, they can keep track of, write down the reports, so that when you do your after action report, which we'll talk towards the end, they will have that information readily available for you to put your report together. So just food for thought on that particular truism. So we're continuing on through the incident command aspect of this. Over-aggressive commanders sometimes risk firefighters' lives needlessly. So this may be a commander, an incident commander, or a new officer who wants to show that he or she really knows their stuff, or he or she really wants to get in there and get that fire put out quickly or take care of the situation quicker than maybe is smart to do. And so we have a saying that over-aggressive commanders, over-aggressive incident commanders, oftentimes they risk firefighters' lives needlessly. So that kind of gives us pause to sit back for a second, continue to reassess the fire or the situation that goes on. There's a term called OODA loop. You could look that up, OODA, OODA loop. And it talks about observing something, orienting yourself to it, deciding what you're doing, and then to take action. And that is a continuous process that goes constantly throughout the incident command process or the fire itself. So if you become over aggressive, sometimes firefighters are put in harm's way, maybe needlessly. My sense is that we have some departments here today that maybe do not have written standard operating procedures or SOPs. And there are certainly a lot of departments that are represented today that do have SOPs written. But the key is to those SOPs, they're great in a book. If you have them in a book or a loose leaf and they're sitting on a shelf and no one reads them or no one follows them, then you might as well not have SOPs. So those of you that are in a position to enforce your firefighters or your junior officers to take account of those SOPs and to use those SOPs, you're going to be in a much better situation when the incident command process goes into action. So the better your SOPs are and the more you follow them, the less need to make on-the-fly decisions. Think back for a moment, those of you that have been in command of fires, and maybe you forgot to use your SOP or the SOP wasn't clear, so you said, oh, the heck with it, I'm going to slide that off to the side and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And the fire got ahead of you or got away from you or the situation got away from you. And then you had to make what we call on-the-fly decisions, kind of pulling things out of your pocket to try to make this thing work, to save lives, whether it's to protect your firefighters or the victims or to stop the forward progression of the fire from one building to the next building to the next building. So the better you have SOPs that are inclusive of all the kinds of situations that you might come into contact with, the better you are to fight that fire or to fight that situation, and the less chance you have of having to do on-the-fly decisions. Excuse me. I'll take another sip of coffee here. Now, when communicating with Chief Howard the other day, he said that there's a question about how to command or how to communicate without the use of radios. So I get the sense that there are some departments that use portable radios or the radios in their vehicles, and there are my assumption is there are departments and agencies that do not use portable radios. And so this has come up to me in several events that I've gone to. Either our radios have failed or we have so much chatter on the radio that you can't understand what's going on. And so we choose sometimes to do what we call face-to-face communications. And oftentimes, it's my opinion that face-to-face communications is superior oftentimes to radio traffic. When you do face-to-face communications, the individual that you're giving the order to or you're corresponding with, they see your body language. They see you in front of them and you can talk face-to-face. There's less delay time in the communication. There's more chance to interact, a lot more of those notations or those concerns or those actions that you need to have accomplished. It's a lot quicker when you do face-to-face. So whether you are in a large event, in a large department, or a small event in a smaller department, if you can accomplish what you need to have done by using face-to-face communications, my opinion is it's much superior to radio traffic. Remember, technology, when you are in the most vulnerable position, oftentimes technology will fail you. So the best technology we have is face-to-face, me talking to my junior officer or my peer in transmitting what we need to have done. As an incident commander, this kind of takes into account when your command is being usurped, or it's being questioned, or it's being threatened, if you will. Unless it's absolutely necessary for you to explain the reason for an order, don't. If you want to establish what is called command presence, and that is, I'm a strong commander, I'm a competent commander, I know what I'm doing, I see the situation I have at hand, I know my resources, I know what my strategy is going to be, my strategy is working, I have my tactics in place, and I have my firefighters and my fire officers accomplishing those tactics. Then if I give an order and someone questions that order, then I'm going to be assert a little more determination, or face-to-face, if you will, communication to that officer or that individual that's questioned that order. So don't explain the reasons for your order unless they don't understand the order. Now, if they don't understand the order, that's one thing. But if they're asking that question, and you can tell from either that individual that's questioning that or asking the question, that they're just trying to challenge your command presence, then don't explain it. Give the order and live by it. There is an event later on we'll talk about that you can then explain that if necessary after the fact. Be emotionally consistent. As an incident commander, as you're managing that scene, if something occurs that is surprising to you, maybe there's an explosion, maybe there's a detonation of something, keep your emotions intact as best as you can. We're all humans, and oftentimes our emotions will show for a microsecond, but as quickly as you can get your emotions back into order and you're consistent with it, it sends that message to your folks that we've got this under control. We know what's going on. I've got a good plan. Let's keep going forward. Let's keep the communications up and keep encouraging your folks that we've got this in hand. So being emotionally consistent is one of those.
Sorry for interruption. I'm just raising my hand so that I can get to sync the points that you are speaking about. But I'm trying to, there's kind of complication, would you just break your points so simpler, because I'm trying to sync them, but I don't get to link to what is going on.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you'll be a little slower.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're breaking out a little bit. Could you say that one more time?
Like I'm saying that I'm trying to sync into the class today, in terms of what Mwalimu is speaking about, and it's not getting on so well like I used to understand the previous unit. So would you just get the points broken down further so that I can get to sync into them, if you don't mind?
Okay. So on the technical side, I think, Leah, maybe you can work with that, or Jose.
Yeah, if there's anything that, like you said, maybe isn't broken down as much today, these resources will be posted online. And so if you want to go back and look at them and think a little bit more in depth about these and how to apply them to your specific fire brigade, then, that is always possible. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And we will, try to describe things in a little bit greater detail.
Oh, thank you, madam.
Yes, and here, there's another solution. At the end of this presentation, there will be my email address. So if you have questions or you want to have a discussion online to explain this further, or to explore it further, I'd be happy to answer your questions. And there's a website that is on there as well, that this presentation, as well as at African Fire Missions headquarters, they will have this online there. And there are some other presentations that might help as well. I think, Jose, you went online to the responder1.org and you found some files that might be helpful as well. So thank you for the comment, and we'll try to explain it as we end up. We'll try to get dig into it further. Okay.
Thank you for that, Frank.
So we talked about command presence just a slide or so before, and command presence has all kinds of definitions. What I tend to term it as or define it as is it's a confident, competent incident commander or scene management commander who clearly can communicate his or her needs and orders, and can communicate clearly and calmly during the height of the situation, and sends that sense of calm, or that sense of presence, so that the individual feels safe and feels competent and confident that they are in the presence of someone who has control of the situation. It's a skill that you have to learn. It's a skill that takes months and sometimes years to gather all the information, to put it in your hard drive in your head, and to take the classes like we're doing today, and to do more research to develop that skill of being a present commander. But it's a skill that I would encourage everyone to get better at. Situational awareness is simply defined as knowing the presence that you're in at the time, knowing what's surrounding you, all the events that are surrounding you, knowing the level of danger or the level of emergency that you're dealing with, knowing your resources, and knowing the level of concern that the people that are working for you or working with you that are present at the time. So there are books out there about situational awareness. There are trainers out there that determine or talk about situational awareness. I believe there's a couple of files that you might find on my website, and perhaps there was a class, I'm not certain of this, perhaps there was a class that AFM, Africa Fire Mission, has presented. Leah, all you have to do is kind of nod your head that you heard me. I'll be happy to put something together in the future to talk about situational awareness and the OODA loop that I talked about earlier, that might really help some new commanders get a better feel and better comfort level for their responsibilities. Determining who is in charge must be determined before the incident occurs. I think that's one of the situations that was brought up last week during Chief Cohen's presentation about what happens when you're challenged, when your command is challenged. The first thing I would say is determining who is in charge must be developed. That answer must be developed before the event occurs, whether it's in writing, whether you have several departments or agencies or volunteer companies that are in your general community that you have to deal with on a regular basis. And maybe you have some disagreements as to who's in charge when they get on the scene. And there are several formulas. Some formula is the first one on the scene is in charge until the next more senior officer arrives at the scene. Or perhaps you are of equal rank. And so if this is my immediate jurisdiction, which we call our first due area, if this is my first due area, but I'm the second company to arrive on the scene, then there could be an understanding, written hopefully, that says when I arrive on the scene, because it's my first due area, then I take charge. I get a brief report of the incident commander that's currently there about what's going on, what they've done, how the scene is progressing or not progressing, and then I assume command. If the command is not transmitted by the radio, then perhaps you use your aide or other firefighters who are not actively involved in the firefighting or the rescue operation to pass the word on that now Jose Ngunjiri is in charge now, and Peter Smith is now taking the second or the assistant role of being in charge. Now that's one system. There are probably a dozen or more systems out there, and we'll try to explore that maybe a little further in the Q&A or during tea time. But the key here is we want to try to determine this ahead of time. I experienced that back in the 80s when we had a county that had 15 different fire departments. And when we started to consolidate, we had to determine how do we impose that feeling, that statement, that understanding that whoever's on the scene, the senior officer is in charge until they are relieved by a higher senior officer or the person who that first due area actually belongs to. And so it took a while. It was a complicated process, but it has to be done so that the people that you're serving, the community, the citizens, they don't see a level of chaos at the scene when, excuse me, a new engine pulls in and then there's an argument going on. Excuse me. So that leads us to that statement, a very straightforward truism, that is, if you're the leader, lead. And that may sound very simplistic, and that's not intended to impart any negative feelings or to insult anyone, but many times people don't understand that statement of, if you're the leader, then lead. Take charge of the situation, make those decisions, give the orders, follow up with those orders, communicate with people, be calm, establish a level of command presence, make sure that you determine who's in charge and remain in charge until relieved otherwise. So if you're the leader, if you're the leader, lead. If you're in charge, lead. Excuse me. So this comes up to one of the things that we might talk about later on, and that was the statement of always conduct a hot wash, no matter how brief the incident. I'm a training officer at heart. I spent 9 years as a chief of training for a fairly large department, and I really got the training bug. And one of the things that we impressed upon our company officers, the ones that are in charge of the engines or the pumpers, that at the end, and the incident commanders, who is typically a battalion chief or a division chief, that at the end of the situation, once the emergency had been taken care of, under control, the fire's out, whatever the situation was, the patients were taken to the hospital or whatever it might be, that at the end of that incident, once the hoses were rolled up, once the vehicles were ready to respond again, we would gather at what we call the tailboard, the back of an engine, or we'd gather apart away from the scene, and we would talk about what went well and maybe what didn't go so well, and how could we improve our services. And we'd talk about some of maybe the mistakes we made, and we wouldn't do it in a sense of belittling or embarrassing anyone, but simply saying, hey, next time we put the ladder against the building, we like to do it with the fly, which is the section that goes up and down, if we're not familiar with that term, that we make sure that the fly is always against the building. Now, you might hear 100 other firefighters say the fly goes out or the fly goes in. That's one of those somewhat comical discussions that firefighters get into, that quite honestly, regardless of whether the fly is in or out, you're going to climb the ladder and get to the roof and do what you have to do. But the point here is that no matter how small the incident, or no matter how large the incident, we always did what was called a hot wash at the end of that incident. Immediately before we went back to quarters, before we went back to our fire stations, we would conduct a hot wash. And it was very somewhat informal process that allowed people to kind of let their feelings out a little bit. Maybe someone had a question about the order that was given, and so you could explain it then, or they didn't agree with something was going on, you can explain it again. Or you could bring up, hey, next time we take that line in, let's make sure we take that second line in. Let's make sure that that second line is as large as or larger than the primary line that we put in, so that we can protect our firefighters in case we have a failure of the engine that's pumping the water. So we always had a hot wash. Now, some people use it in the hazardous materials world, hazmat world, and a hot wash is a different meaning. It means to grossly decon the personal protective equipment or the equipment that we're using. It would hot wash it and clean it down. But the term that I used, that I am familiar with, is hot wash is a quick meeting of all the actors, whether it's the most junior firefighter and the most senior officer there, and everyone in between. We'd stand around, maybe drink some water or some Gatorade or whatever you have there to replenish our bodies, and we would talk about the situation and kind of bring everything to a close. That's a hot wash. Explain to your people what you expect at different types of calls and train them. So if you've got those SOPs written and you talk about single family dwellings or multifamily dwellings or commercial buildings or vehicles that are on all four tires, or vehicles that are overturned, or large vehicles that are carrying fuel. All those are different types of calls, and you would have strategies or maybe even tactics for each one of those calls, and maybe they're in written SOP form. Or if not, then you as the senior officer, you would tell your folks, when we go to this kind of call, this is what I expect of you to do. We need to take off, come off the vehicle, off the engine or off the truck with tools in our hands, or you two folks, or you one individual, I want you to pull the hose line and bring it to the front door. I want some other person, when you're done with that, to take the ladder and put it up against the building, whatever it might be. Tell them what you expect of them to do, and then train them to do it, because hopefully you're getting more people in. Many of you are in volunteer organizations. You'll bring more people in as they get more interested in helping their community. And so it's a constant training process. Those of us that are in larger organizations, it's a formalized process, which you have it already written down in written form, in booklets, or in memos, or whatever it might be. But folks want to know what's expected of them. They want to succeed. They want to do good. They want to serve their community, and they want to serve you. But make sure they know what you expect of them and what they can expect of you, and train them to that level that you want. Tell your people what to do, but not how to do it. Now, as you're training them, you'll train them how to do it. But once you get them trained, just tell them what you want done at the incident, before the incident, during the incident, after the incident, and so forth. Whether we're talking about rehab, we talked about that a couple months ago. If you have some folks that you're going to use as scene rehabbers, so that when firefighters are exhausted, you bring them out, get them to take their bunker gear off, you cool them down, give them a drink of water, let them rest for a minute, maybe take blood pressure, vital if you have that capability, and then stage them and get them ready to go back into the fire. Tell them what you want to have done, but not necessarily how to do it if they're trained properly. So we'll talk about this at tea time when your command is challenged. I explored some of it just a little while ago, but maybe we can explore a little further later on. Let's see. Now is the Q&A. Leah, I think Leah is still there. We just open this up, or do people chat on, use the chat process? How do we do that?
Yeah, anyone who has questions at this time, you can unmute, ask your questions. If you don't want to unmute, you can always type it in the chat and I can read it out loud for you guys. Or just any other comments that you have about the presentation, you can voice those now.
Great. Okay. And what I will do is, first of all, I would thank everyone for your attention and for your cooperation. Both Leah and Jose, thank you so much for your help, for helping me kind of stumble through this process. And what I put on my screen are 2 points of contact. My email is at the bottom, frm1@me.com. And if anyone has a question or would like to explore something further, or you've got a need for some kind of training materials, I've got a whole boatload of training materials here. Be happy to share those with you. And there's a website called www.responder1.org. That's a website that I put up, and I just put all the stuff that I've gathered and written over the years. I write some articles for some of the magazines over here in the States, and whatever's on there, they're free to download and to share and to use. And so I want to share that with you. So at this time, if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer it, or during tea time, we can explore them as well.
Yes, well, if no one has any further questions right now, or I guess, sorry, there just got a question in the chat. The question is there a difference between hot wash and deprive?
What's the second word?
Deprive or deprive.
I'm not familiar with it section, or with that term. Let me see if I can. Between how I can deprive. I'm not certain of that term that I've heard. But let me explain a little further the hot wash. The hot wash is typically a brief overview of the incident and kind of explaining why we did what we did, and did we do everything well? Could we do it better? But also keep in mind that there's an AAR, an after action report. I think Jose brought that up one time, or I know that Chief Cohen did as well. An after action report in my experience in the departments I worked in, it was a much more formal process. It was taking into account the situation that we had at hand when we arrived, the actions we took, what the successes or the failures of our actions, all the people that were on the scene, maybe some victims of the incident, and we put it into a report. And towards the end, we put recommendations for improvement or recommendations to address situations in the future. So a hot wash is just kind of a real quick overview of how we performed, good, bad, or indifferent, and then with no challenges and no blaming of people, but just kind of a real quick informal process, if you will, which led to perhaps the after action report, which if you have a good aide that can take notes down during the scene, then they help tremendously when you write your after action report. Anything else? Let's see.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that definitely clarified it and went into a little bit more depth about that. So thank you. And at this time, we can transition it to tea time. So before we close off, I do just want to say a couple more reminders. Just one more time that this was recorded and it's posted for free on our YouTube channel. So if you ever have any other questions, you can go back and watch this. And you can also invite any of your colleagues or members of your community that are interested in the fire service. Everyone is welcome to these trainings. Just follow the same link that you used today to get on today's training next week. And as tea time starts, I'm also going to be posting in the chat a quick little evaluation if you guys would love to fill that out. We really appreciate hearing you guys' feedback on things. And so that will be coming in the chat shortly, as well as a link to our Facebook networking group. That is a great way to get involved with Africa Fire Mission and just get connected with other members and other firefighters in your area. And so with all of that being said, I just want to say thank you one more time for coming, and thank you so much for Frank for presenting today. And you guys can get into tea time. Bye-bye.